Hey everyone, True here, and today we are going to review the new Storm SSR Odin, looking at her pros and her cons and what tier she will likely go to in my tier list. First up, let's check her AI analysis, where we see a lot of modifiers for her hit level. The biggest one being her first one, and that is time in combat, 200 time units, which causes a hate multiplier of 1.99, which is one of the biggest that I've ever seen. But it does make sense because Ragnarok, which is unlocked after 200 time units, is such a powerful skill. Similarly, the second modifier of 1.2 becomes activated if there is an enemy with more than 100 time units, which does make sense because of her Time Blaster skill. Another 1.1 threat level modifier is applied if there is a Raven on the battlefield, which means she can use the skill Gungnir. And the last two multipliers that we see here basically depend on whether she has used the Supreme Stun yet or not. If she hasn't, that's another 30% increase of her threat level. If she has, her threat level falls by 40%, which is actually quite a lot. This means between her Supreme Stun and Ragnarok, her threat level will actually be relatively low. There can be scenarios where the first three conditions are met and she hasn't used the Supreme Stun yet, in which case her threat level is an enormous 341%. I'm not sure if any other SSR character can reach a higher threat level than Odin, honestly. As for her active skills, the weights are quite pleasing to the eye. We have a 1.0 weight for the Time Blaster and Gungnir, a 10.0 weight for the Supreme Stun, and a 100.0 weight for Ragnarok. This means she will definitely use Ragnarok if she can, and the Supreme Stun also takes priority over the Time Blaster and Gungnir. Looking a bit deeper into the Time Blaster AI, it looks a bit odd to me. There seems to be some modifiers that make her prefer to use that skill if she is on low HP. And at the same time, there isn't really something that makes her target high TU enemies more, it seems. But maybe that is something that is hidden in the code, because of course, if she is on low HP and can use the Gungnir skill, it would be quite advisable to do so. To do that, of course, she needs a Raven on the battlefield, and looking at these Ravens and their AI, we have a very clear view here in terms of the threat level. Very, very simple rule. If there is no Odin on the battlefield or in reinforcements of the team, then the threat level of these Ravens will be quite high at 1.5. This means the enemies will try to take them out to avoid a Supreme Revival. The Supreme Revival, of course, is the skill that they will absolutely use in any case if they can. Otherwise, they might get off a Stun Bolt. Of course, this one is quite conditional. And then we have the Go for the Ice basic skill, which is very good. 50 time units. Ignores guards and weakens the enemy unit that is attacked. With the Go for the Ice skill, the Ravens will usually like to go for low HP targets or enraged targets, which makes a lot of sense actually. Moving on to the advantages that Odin brings to your team, and first up, of course, we have the Supreme Stun, that kind of instant 500 time unit stun that pretty much disables possibly one enemy if there is no gift turner on the enemy team. On top of that, because it is instant, she should usually get off a Time Blaster immediately afterwards, which might just get you the spirit back because it has some spirit steal ability, which is very, very nice. If the enemy target has 100 time units or more, she steals 2 spirit from them. Her Ravens, the Winged Shades, the many ones that she can spam, also steal spirit upon their entry. However, all in all, I would still say that spirit is an issue with this Odin SSR. Of course, we have the Time Blaster skill, which produces and steals spirit, However, the Supreme Stun takes 3 Spirit, the Gungnir skill takes 2 Spirit, which is also considerable, and then there's also the Ragnarok skill, which takes 2 Spirit. Considering what it does, it's not all that much. However, it does mean that she needs to have quite some Spirit available, and it doesn't end there, because also the Supreme Revival skill from the Winged Shades will also need 2 Spirit. So there are just some conditions that need to be met. It's not enough to kind of get the turn, but you should also have some other units on the field that hopefully are a bit more spirit producing than Odin potentially is. However, of course, the kind of Winged Shades spam might steal quite a lot of spirit in the course of the battle. And considering that there isn't really a limit on Winged Shades, this kind of mechanic is something that can truly snowball. If you fully awaken your Odin, of course, she gets kind of 10 ravens straight away, but then if she uses the Ragnarok skill, she will produce another 4. If she uses the Gungnir skill, yeah, she sacrifices a raven on the battlefield, but produces another 2. So there is quite the potential for a lot of ravens. Unlike with Jirel, there doesn't seem to be any limits in terms of snowballing for these Winged Shades. Very important in terms of that kind of snowball and a lot of units coming onto the field for your team that aren't really super strong is, of course, that they do not count for deadly skills or savage skills. That is super important in the current meta because there's just so many units that benefit from killing units or accumulating kills. Without this aspect of the passives of the Ravens, Odin might end up being a liability like some of the other SSRs from last year, for example, Tiamat. Yes, the Winged Shades do take 2.5 times as much damage and don't have a huge amount of HP, so they will die rather easily. However, something that I didn't consider in my initial review from last week is that these kind of Winged Shades, opposite to Moris, actually use the weapon of Odin as well, which means the HP become bigger, and sometimes the kind of basic attacks will not be enough to kill them, and they will get the turn regardless, of course healing back to 100% HP in the process. So yeah, these ravens don't really die all too easily. Well, in general, yes, they do, but they can kind of act as pseudo guards in the process, and each one of them is kind of a backup plan for Odin in terms of survival. So I think the Odin SSR is kind of the one that has the most backup plans in terms of getting revived yet again and yet again and yet again. Which is nice, of course, because her most powerful skill, Ragnarok, sacrifices herself, but it is a skill that hits super hard, this kind of 600% damage to all enemy units, ignoring armor and stealth status effects, is really, really big. Under the right circumstances, possibly taking out 3 to 4 units of the enemy team. The attack doesn't seem to ignore the counter stance, though, something to keep in mind. Another thing to like about Odin is the sleep ward that she enters the battle with, although of course against somebody like Kaguya, this is something that might wear off quite quickly. So it's all the more important that she does have the kind of light speed entry when she enters as a conjured version. This means if she has sufficient spirit, she will be able to get off a supreme stun straight away and disable an enemy unit potentially. I also really like the kind of combination she can do, basically coming onto the battlefield, hopefully using the supreme stun, then using a time blaster, 100 time units later, also using a time blaster, and then pretty much exactly at the point where she unlocks Ragnarok, she can possibly use the Ragnarok. This is very good potential timing because of that really high hate that she sometimes has. You don't really want her to be a lot of time units away from her turn when she unlocks Ragnarok because of that really, really high hate that is unlocked afterwards. Also, if she cannot use the Supreme Stun because of spirit restrictions, this might also really heavily weigh on her survivability. And now we are already moving, of course, into the kind of cons stuff about Odin. One thing that is a bit cloudy, but I think it is worth mentioning, is that it is a bit of a problem that she has this kind of impermanent presence on the battlefield. So she isn't really a unit that is just there and carries you and puts out damage and survives. She is someone that really only sticks around usually for a short time, then uses Ragnarok and sacrifices herself, then of course needs the kind of winged shades to bring her back to the battlefield. And here a big RNG factor comes in, of course, in terms of where are these winged shades in the battalion, when do the next ones come in. And in terms of the RNG factor, this is also something that might screw up your team build a little bit. So then it is possibly an issue. Of course, if you are running burn, then it's a really big issue. You really don't want Odin and her ravens kind of going into the middle of a burn team. This especially is true because the winged shades just immediately die against the burn status effect. Also, they are weak against poison, of course, which might be something to consider given that we have another poison SSR in Loki coming up. Burn, poison are weaknesses of Odin, but arguably stun is also a big one. Spirit I already mentioned. So there are a few things that are going against Odin here. Another pro though is that she doesn't really need guards necessarily. If she starts in P1, it is kind of nice because she sacrifices herself, so you can kind of plan with that and maybe have someone come in that is also hiding behind a guard that is potentially still alive, somebody like Bright Lancelot, for example. But also, if she hasn't unlocked Ragnarok yet, but has used her Supreme Stun, she might be able to fly under the radar of the enemy AI. So that is why I think she doesn't really need a guard 100%. So she might be a really good pick for your second or third platoon in arena. Of course, you need to be mindful of hopefully still having at least 10 non-conjured allies in your team when she enters the battlefield to maximize the number of ravens that she spawns. In terms of tier prediction, most voters on the community tab of my channel think that she will go to SS tier, and in terms of abilities, I do agree. It is quite a crazy strong skill set that might really shake up certain playstyles, but her kind of gimmicky skill set might actually turn off a few people, especially the RNG factor is a big one that I'm not sure how well people will like it being introduced into their teams. You don't want to have any burn on your team when you're using her, and also you don't really want to face burn if you're using her. So I don't really think she has a place in the platoon ones of the absolute top whales in the current meta. Nevertheless, she is a great pick for platoon 2 and 3, and I can see her turning around quite a few battles in your favor, but in some other battles maybe not doing all that much, although the floor for that is quite low if she is fully awakened. Two last things that I want to point out here. This is a unit that really needs the awakenings. I really don't think there's a lot of use in getting one copy of Odin. Of course, she can still get off the Supreme Stun, but without the kind of Raven Snowball, it is a bit problematic. And of course, she is a bit spirit hungry sometimes, and not putting out a lot of damage with her attacks will be quite unfortunate, which is the case if she is just at one copy. Another point, I don't think she's a great carry unit for beginners, so if you are considering if you should get her as a first SSRs, I would recommend you not to get Odin. There are other SSRs that have a more permanent damage output on the battlefield. I hope you enjoyed this analysis of Odin. Let me and others know in the comments what you think of her, if you have already seen her a bit on the battlefields. Thanks to Nizetto, LensChairs and Saturn for the visuals used in this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to become a true carrot. Stay tuned for the upcoming Loki review. And as always, thanks for watching.